Good morning, everyone. Uh, Thank you all for attending our second lecture in this lecture series. We're very excited to see such a large turnout for this event. We are going to be continuing this series throughout the remainder of the academic year. We try to have a lecture a month. So please continue to join us. Something new that we are starting, which you will see advertised screen, is the Journal Club series that we're going to be beginning starting next week. It's going to be a continued discussion of what John is going to be talking about today. And hopefully John will be able to lead that discussion. But essentially the structure to the Journal Club will be after the lecture that we hear from John today, there's a topic to it, right? So to continue our understanding and discussion about this topic, we would like to feed that into a journal club where each participant finds a journal under that topic, presents. Those of us who went to Pittsburgh this summer know about a fire hose slide. So it's just a one slide kind of presentation about that journal. Like 1 minute, we're just going to literally give an overview of that article. And the idea behind it is, each person will give that one slide presentation on their article to stimulate the discussion on that topic. Okay, so everyone who participates in a journal club, just like any other journal club, you are going to bring a journal to the table. And the way that you present that journal is through that fire hose slide, one slide. And so then, as we will continue that discussion about this topic from there. So if you are interested, please join us. You will see the flyer is advertised on your screen now. You can scan or go to the website and register. It is also on the website. So if you've been to our website, we're continuously working on it, trying to make it better. But you have access to be able to register for the Journal Club and all lectures there. It is also where we update you on everything network. So please continue to visit that site, and if any feedback that you see, please provide to us so that we know what to do to make it better. All right, so without further ado, let's talk about John. So as John mentioned, we met John this summer. So the network was at Carnegie Mellon. Obviously, that's our collaborating institution for the Learn Lab Summer School, where we have the opportunity to work with others in data science, science of learning, and also understand how to use various types of software to utilize these concepts that we're learning about the science of learning, implement them into different tutors and tools in our classrooms. And so while there this summer, I met John, and he can tell you on the spot, I was like, John, we're going to have this lecture series, and I think you would be amazing. I think that people want to hear what you have to say. Such a riveting speaker, very intelligent gentleman. He is a graduate student at UC Irvine. So without further ado, please welcome John Lopez, and we're excited, John.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hayward. So I just want to say, first of all, I'm very humbled to be in this space today. This is the first time I've been invited to give a talk like this. So I really want to thank all of you for your participation, for coming today, and just for this opportunity to share what I've been working on for my dissertation proposal. So I do want to have a small disclaimer that this dissertation proposal is still a work in progress. So there are some parts that are more fleshed out than others. My hope is that as a result of this presentation, it'll give us a new way of thinking about data science, and that you'll be able to kind of see the ways that I'm thinking about data science and particularly think about how these could be applied into the data science work that you're doing as a result of the HBU Science of Learning Network programs that you're all a part of. That said, I would like to share my screen, and excellent. Second to get oriented. Not that. All right, so thank you all very much for coming today. My name is John Lopez. I'm a graduate student at University of California, Irvine, and this is my dissertation. This is where I'm at so far with my dissertation proposal. What does it all mean? Making meaningful learning measures in interdisciplinary data science education. For today's presentation, I'm going to give you an overview of the topic, kind of what the compelling issues that are driving me to pursue this topic. Want to give you a glimpse of the theoretical frameworks that I'm using. I want to give you just a little bit of the literature review, and I want to give you an overview of my study design so far. If you have any sort of clarifying questions, there will be a section at the end for you to ask. And there will also, I'm open to hearing any sort of feedback for improvement, because like I said, this is still very much a work in progress. But yeah, I just really appreciate being here today. That said, I'd like to start with an overview of the topic. There's a trend in data science education in that it is shifting towards this idea of epistemological pluralism. That is to say, there exist multiple true ways of solving a problem, knowing what's in a problem, knowing something as a result of the problem, and interpreting your results from the problem. This is because what is considered valuable knowledge in data science learning is shifting. We have access to more kinds of data. We have big data, we've got wide data, we've got all kinds of data that are being generated from online systems, they're being generated from data sets, and as a result, students have more opportunities to work with different kinds of data sets. Traditionally, data science has been conceived as a mix of statistics and computer science. But what we're seeing now is that data science educators are more open to including different kinds of data within their practices. Moreover, within data science education, folks are more interested in abilities with reasoning with data. It's not enough just to go out and collect data. Data science educators are particularly interested in the ways that reason students with the data that they receive. All in all, this creates a need for data science education research to understand the different ways that students are making meaning with data. So we can understand this idea of epistemological pluralism from drawing from the learning sciences. There's a really popular way of teaching computer science known as constructionism, which is based off the principle that learning best happens when learners construct artifacts that are personally meaningful to them. Another way you can conceive constructionism as this is learning by making. So constructionism is really focused on the processes that go when students design things like art, they design computer programs, so on and so forth. And the projects that they choose have some sort of meaning to them. Generally, rich, in-depth qualitative analyses of students' observations as they're constructing these meaningful artifacts document these problem-solving strategies. But it's a pretty time-consuming process to study a student or to study a group of students as they're going about the process of making. Making takes a very long time, and there's a lot of things that you have to observe. It's a lot of data to process. So you can get very rich information about students' problem-solving processes in constructionist environments, but it just takes a little bit of time. Within the learning sciences, there's another set of approaches called learning analytics, which are concerned with identifying measures of learning and interpreting these measures for the sake of better understanding learning. In other words, these learning analytics point to evidence of some learning phenomenon. And they're often collected through some sort of learning environment. Online environments like MOOCs are a really good way of collecting learning analytics. This past summer, I had the privilege of working with you all on a project with the Open Learning Initiative. So all of those measures that you collect within OLI, those are learning analytics. And they're used to inform us about our learners and how we can make learning better in the environment. In particular, learning analytics researchers were interested in exploring this problem of meaningful learning, where learning is said to be meaningful to a student when they connect newly understood knowledge to their prior learning experiences. So again, learning analytics folks are interested in exploring the ways in which students learn. Meaningful learning is an approach that's argued to understand how students learn. So in the early days of learning analytics, there was an interest in developing these meaningful learning analytics. Over time, this interest had waned because it's really difficult to understand the different complexities that go into these meaningful learning measures. Because there's a lot of different connections that a student can make to their prior experiences, what they maybe learned in a discipline setting, what they learned in school settings, what they learned in out-of-school settings. It was a very overwhelming process. So what makes a learning analytic a learning analytic? Generally, learning analytics are conceived as some sort of decisions relating to learning assessment. Oftentimes, these are psychometrically validated, meaning they go through some statistical measure of rigor. They're used to inform decisions about pedagogy, and they're used to inform us about learning theory. Recently, there's been a trend in shifting towards purely data-driven computational methods of student learning. This includes your AI models, and this has been the metric of learning analytics moving forward. But another way of conceiving learning analytics is process analytics. That is to say, perhaps they're not useful to make statistically valid claims about learning that are generalizable to all populations, or maybe they're not great for designing these complex computational models, but they're helpful in researchers and educators making formative claims about student learning. An example of process data could be verbal descriptions of student problem-solving processes. Example was a study that I cited was where there was an online learning environment called Scratch, and researchers were able to identify distinct processes of students, like distinct directions that students were going down based on their interests, based off the processes that they use to create projects within the Scratch environment. So process data is very well known in the computer science literature, computer science education literature, for understanding student actions within a programming environment. What I pose is, what if this process data can inform us about learning analytics within epistemically diverse learning environments to reason about the different ways that students are creating things with data? So in this dissertation, I want to explore how analyzing firsthand data, that is to say, this is data that's designed and collected by the student from constructionist learning environments as process data, inform us of meaningful learning processes, which can ultimately inform us to think about the different ways, the epistemologically plural ways that students are reasoning with data. So for the next part of this presentation, I'm going to go into the theoretical frameworks that I drew from to construct this, the claims that I'm making in this dissertation, and that are going to ultimately guide the studies. So I talk a lot about this idea of meaningful learning. My understanding of meaningful learning is drawn from constructivist theory. So constructivist, this is with a V. We're going to go a little bit with constructionism with an N and explain the differences between the two. But the main definition of meaningful learning is built by foundations of constructivist theory, which is that first, learners build upon new knowledge based on what, learners build new knowledge based on what they already know. That is to say, this is how learners construct the knowledge, is they have a foundation, they have some sort of foundation, and they add and build new things to this conceptual understanding. Learning takes place both in individual and social contexts, meaning that some learning happens in individual settings, and there's some learning that happens within social groups and settings. All approaches of constructivism accept that learners can apply something in one context to another, and that in order to learn, the learner has to participate in some sort of actively engaging activity, meaning it's not like this, it's not meant to be this passive process where the learner is just sitting there and receiving. They have to be doing something. Constructivist theory, of course, is divided into four major camps. I'm going to explain these four major camps momentarily, but the divisions are based off of these questions. To what extent is knowledge objective truth or subjective truth? And from where is knowledge constructed? Is it mainly from individual practices, or is it mainly from social practices? I bring these different questions up because epistemological pluralism then must consider the ways that students view knowledge as containing certain kinds of truth, as it can contain both objective truth and subjective truth. And I want to look at the different ways that students are constructing knowledge. Maybe some of them prefer to construct it in individual practices. Some of them prefer to construct it in a more social setting. Constructivism is based off of this idea of cognitive constructivism. This is generally where students first learn in learning sciences programs, developed by Jean Piaget. And this argument is that learners learn best through constructing their understanding in personal processes. That is to say that learners develop these mental models or schemas based on what they already know, and they have to fit this knowledge into these existing schemas. So this can be a process that's as simple as they're just simply adding this on to their existing schema, or they have to reframe their schema to accommodate this new knowledge. And if students can't do either of this, then the information is not properly understood by the student. Big idea in cognitive constructivism is that learning best happens through conflict. This conflict is often triggered by social processes, and following this conflict, students have to cognitively make decisions as to how this knowledge fits into their understanding. The common criticism of cognitive constructivist perspectives is that it excludes social processes and practices. My response to that is that it doesn't ignore social context. It just considers it as one part of many within a given learning environment. Because social context is very complex, people are very complex people. Cognitive constructivists argue that researchers presently lack a set of methodologies for really understanding all the nuances that go into a social situation. So cognitive constructivists really like to look at the fine-grained mental processes. There are a lot of fine-grained mental processes that happen at any given time within a social setting, making it very difficult to really understand everything. Some people argue this as a division between qualitative research and quantitative research, but from the world of learning analytics, we know that it's possible to adopt this cognitive stance on both text and numerical data. So what I argue is that the difference between is that one of the distinguishing features of cognitive constructivism is this idea of seeking objective truth. That is to say that cognitive constructivists are very interested in understanding how one's mental understanding of a concept aligns with these objectively true models of reality. That is to say that a person's understanding doesn't have to be perfect or fully understood, because there are simply some things that we just cannot know because of our observations, because of our biases, so on and so forth. It's not possible to obtain every component of objective truths, like laws of nature, because of these limitations. Nevertheless, the purpose of cognitive constructivism is that our mental models are aligned with some representation of reality. Because, like I said, it's not always possible to get those complete representations, Piaget was considered a pragmatist. That is to say that he was more focused on what was observable in a given situation. So from this dissertation, I draw from the Piagetian processes of knowledge construction and take a pragmatic stance towards the kinds of data that students reason with. That it's more important to focus on what we can observe rather than considering what we can't observe. Another form of constructivism I draw from is this idea of radical constructivism. Radical constructivism was initially identified by Ernst von Glaserfeld, who argued that knowledge was only useful if it stood up to tangible experiences and could inform us about how to recreate or avoid particular situations. That is to say, the purpose of science was not really to try and understand what we couldn't observe, but it was really to make better sense of the experiences that we have. Von Glaserfeld did not reject the existence of objective truths or realities, but this idea of pursuing after personal experience rather than natural phenomena was considered radical at the time. Hence the name radical constructivism. Over time, the idea of radical constructivism has shifted to this idea that all truth is subjective, that all truth is constructed in the eyes of the beholder, for the purposes of shifting control of knowledge by the learners. That is to say that the belief that no reality holds objective truth is a really powerful way of taking control of situations and really changing the narrative of education. So while this perspective is useful for promoting justice, equity, and the well-being of learners, this dissertation does not ascertain that all interpretations of data are particularly correct. That is, it's possible for a student to have a completely distinct observation from reality. An example of this is a misunderstanding in mathematics. Because the student's misinterpretation of mathematics does not align with our current understanding of mathematics, it's not considered correct. But that's not to say that viewing that interpretation is not useful. And again, this is taking a more pragmatic approach to radical constructivism, that all knowledge is still useful for researchers and educators to learn something about the meaning-making processes of students. There is one big idea that we draw that came out of radical constructivism, however, and that is constructionism with the N. So constructionism was developed by a student of Jean Piaget named Seymour Papert, who argued that a student's ability to construct knowledge was inherently connected to the physical objects around the student. That is to say, students used physical representations use physical objects as objects to think with. That learning was intrinsically connected to the world that the student lived in and the objects that a student worked with. So the way that a student constructed something in the real world, predominantly with the use of tools, reflected something about their learning. That is to say, this was a projection of the transformations or the meaning-making processes that occur in the minds of the student that is constructed. In order to create a setting for a student to construct, there needs to be some sort of epistemological pluralism within this environment. That is to say, you need to allow the learners to construct with multiple different kinds of artifacts and have different outcomes for the activity. So current constructionist work looks at the different ways that learners are approaching learning regarding differences in things like culture, social norms, and access to materials. And every constructionist environment has some way of reflecting on the students' learning processes. So from this dissertation, I'm saying that data generated from constructionist environments are the objects that students use to think with. That is to say, when students manipulate data, the changes that they make in their data manipulations are reflecting the mental processes that occur as they're thinking about the data. So constructionist environments, like I keep emphasizing this idea of pragmatism, is that they're not concerned with whether evaluators believe that the knowledge is subjectively true or objectively true, but rather allowing the learners to discover truth for themselves over time. Constructionism receives many of the same critiques as cognitive constructivism, is that it cannot fully encapsulate the social elements of learning. The caveat to this is that when constructionism was initially conceived, Seymour Papert he had a lot of distrust in formal schooling systems, and he argued that schools could support little in the processes where students troubleshoot. Over time, this was viewed as perhaps a weakness of constructionism, and that the role of teachers and the teacher and staff support in constructionist environments as facilitators, not necessarily instructors, has been emphasized. That is to say, it's important to help support students as they think through what they're doing. But because this, was developed from an individual perspective of constructivism, is that constructionist researchers have to apply some additional sociocultural theory to understand the social practices within constructionist learning. One study looks at theories of storytelling and approaches of storytelling as ways of viewing how students are constructing. That is to allow the students to write their own narratives of constructing and learning from these stories. So some view these sociocultural theories as a competing framework to constructionism, but what I'm saying is that by combining the two within a constructionist research setting, we can gain more insight to the social practices that are key to the processes of learning. So this dissertation draws from qualitative methodologies grounded in two new kinds of constructivism, social and situated constructivism, to observe the way that social contexts play within constructionist data science learning. And we're going to get into those right now. Social constructivism is the most popular constructivist stance within the educational data science. Rather than being drawn from the work of Piaget, it actually comes from a separate body of literature developed by Lev Vygotsky, who argued that people construct knowledge through social, culture, and environmental factors. That is to say, the symbolic interactions between people and other people is the key way that somebody constructs knowledge. By symbolic interactions, I mainly mean language, but you'll see that there are other ways, but I'm proposing there are other ways to think about these symbolic interactions. Because language is the main form of symbolic interactions that people make, this idea of thinking out loud allows researchers to understand the ways that students are constructing knowledge. This is to say that personal thinking processes are not important. This is to say that personal thinking processes are still important, but these individual interpretations do not have to be aligned with a set of universal truths. That is to say, objective truth in the context of social constructivism is whatever the shared meaning of the group at hand is. You could say that this is also a pragmatic way of looking at truth, as a group's interpretations of something need not align with another group's interpretations of something, but that there's still a general consensus of what's considered true and not true as defined by a group. The big thing I want to take away from social constructivism in this dissertation is that social interactions and external experiences directly influence the ways that students learn. And this helps result in some of the epistemologically plural ways that students are thinking about problem solving with data. From social constructivism, we have what's called situated constructivism. And this integrates this theory of situated learning with social constructivism. Situated learning theory is also popular in the learning sciences, and it argues that the reasoning a student makes about something is inherently bound up or connected to where this learning happened. So Jean Lave, one of the pioneers of situated learning, viewed mathematics learning as distinct from the mathematics learning in the classroom as distinct from these real world scenarios that students were applying mathematical reasoning. And I'm not sure if it's Jean Lave or Jean Lave. That's embarrassing. Anyway, she described knowledge as something between a relationship between a person and an activity, that this relationship changes through interactions with each other. So meaning of something is subject to change through negotiations in a relationship. And like I said, this meaning is generally mediated through some sort of symbolic interaction like language. The criticism of situated constructivism is that there's no embedded system of validating what is objectively true, and that there are no specific ways of making certain predictions or testable hypotheses like you could with perhaps a more fine-grained cognitive stance. That is to say, situated constructivists are mostly interested in the ways that people change in their participations within a community, and it doesn't make claims about individual computations or individual learning processes. But many situated constructivists also uphold the stance that all truth is subjective, which, like I said, I take a more pragmatic stance towards truth. But the main takeaway that I draw from constructivist thinking is that data are situated in the context that they are created in, and that they encode meaning in the same way that language encodes meaning. To give you an example of what I mean by this, I would like to do a small in-chat activity. So consider this perspective about data. Consider data as a symbolic representation of some mental connection made between the data creator and the knowledge of some mental construct that the data represents. Here is an example of a possible codebook generated by a student. So based on what you see here in this small table, what does this tell you about the student who designed the codebook? That they're logical? Yeah, that they have adapted some sort of logic system to their design of the data. That's one way of looking at it. They like easy to understand codes. It's another good observation. That they're going to be taking height of friends and labeling it as age? Yes. What about the idea of height? Height is or what about inches as a form of measuring height? That the student, what this is saying is that the student has some mental representation of the concept of an inch, and the student can apply that concept of an inch to height. What about this data type that they're labeling height as? They're labeling it as a string. It could be an integer, but they're labeling it as a string. Why do we think that is? The label is separate from the measure as a form of measurement. Yes, so that the student is adopting the student believes that a string could be used to measure the height. In other words, this is a misinterpretation of the idea of data types. They correlate measurement with a device versus the measurement. Yes, they are. This gives us insight into how that they're thinking about measuring something. So as you can see, that you can get a deep sense of how the student is thinking about data, of the different ways that students are thinking about data based on just the way that the student is describing that the data that they've created. And perhaps these ways aren't necessarily the most conducive to answering a question, but you're able to see these like by applying these different lenses to this student's ways of thinking about data, you're able to better understand how they're thinking about data. So to summarize this whole section, I'm drawing from the fact that data are objects students think with to reflect their processes of meaning making. All data are situated in context and therefore influenced by the context in which they are created. And through pinpointing the manipulations that students make with the data, researchers and educators can better help and support students with different ways of thinking. That is to say, these epistemologically plural interpretations of student data. Students may have different beliefs about truth constrained by the data, although generally speaking, novice students are going to position all data as generally seem to position data as containing absolute objective truth. And students may believe that data is either individually or socially constructed. So I do want to briefly go into a little bit of the literature review and how these theories of learning connect to data science education, and then I want to explain my studies. So data science education is currently configuring its identity. A lot of people consider data science education as part of this greater data literacy movement. That is to say, data science education is focused on the ability to read, understand, create, and communicate data as information. But others derive data science education as some sort of statistics or computer science education additional components. What's really interesting is that the role of technology as a part of data science education is questioned. Some people are saying that you need to have complex technology to prepare students to use this for really complex algorithms. But others are saying that access to technology is a barrier for marginalized populations, and that it's still possible to reason about data without the need for this complex technology. In other words, perhaps data science education is more so the science of data analysis. And that data science education is shifting towards using inquiry-based learning skills based by constructivist theory and the ability to reason with data. Some open challenges in data science education include, how do we teach research skills for data science students? How do we teach them the ways to reason with data that lead to different kinds of conclusions? How do we teach students to consider the role of context in data literacy? Like, how do we teach students to consider the ways that the environment that data are created in influence the data? How do we provide access to data sets that are meaningful to the students? While access to data is becoming more increasingly available, there are still challenges to creating accessible data sets for many students. And lastly, what is the role of qualitative data within data science education? As I said, data are a way of looking at a set of symbols that encode meaning. So that includes language, that includes text. It doesn't have to include just numbers. So what's the role of this data within data science learning? Data science education is starting to take a situated approach to reasoning with data. In particular, a very popular way of having students think about the role of context in data is have them collect data that's relevant to their lives. So this is called the data generation approach, and this allows students to collect and interpret data that's personally meaningful to them. And this overcomes this data access problem that I was describing. But within secondary data science education, the ways in which students can collect data are often very predetermined and very rigid. Generally, there are a lot of technical difficulties that occur with different kinds of data collection. Like, for example, if a student wants to study lava, you can't just send them up a volcano to study the temperature of magma. That would be very dangerous, and you would get sued for that. So if the student wants to answer questions about lava, they have to use a secondary data set that's pre-collected by somebody else. So because of this, because of the challenges with data collection, educators often have to limit the kinds of problems that students can solve with data science in a secondary school setting. Constructionist approaches kind of flip this idea of controlling what the students can or cannot do. A recent study applied data science principles using block-based programming and looking at the ways that students manipulate data sets using low computationally intensive programming environments. Whereas to say, like, these programming environments, rather than like typing things, you use block-based programming. And you build the program like you would a Lego set. I wish I had a picture to show this, but that's one way of integrating constructionist principles in data science education. Others don't focus on programming whatsoever and are focusing on data collected by hand. And oftentimes, block-based programming environments will embed storytelling as part of the narrative design. That is to say, as the students are building things with these programming blocks, they're able to tell a data story. So what if we had a data science program that was both situated and constructionist? We're going to skip this brainstorming together thing for the sake of time and give you some context about the program that I will be using as part of my dissertation proposal. It's an extension to a study that uses it's an after-school program that integrates mathematics into sports. So as you can see here, this is known as fraction ball, where the students play a variety of games on a basketball court that's also divided into fractions. So fraction and mathematics learning is naturally embedded and interwoven into the environment that students are learning in. Study 1. In what ways do students connect new knowledge to existing knowledge using firsthand data in a constructionist data science learning program? So this study uses this math-based basketball court as a context for integrating sports interest-driven learning with data inquiry into problems that are related to sports and mathematics. In other words, students choose the problems that they want to solve. They can choose to either approach it qualitatively or quantitatively, but students must collect, analyze, and interpret their own firsthand data with counselors supporting them as necessary. Students will have all kinds of ways to collect data. They'll have video cameras, recorders, Fitbits to collect physical data, sets of interview protocols and observation protocols, and worksheets that are currently a work in progress to observe. They'll have different ways to analyze it, like block-based programming tools, worksheets, Google Sheets. We'll be introducing them to a couple of concepts, but really students are going to have the rein as to what they use. And they'll have different ways of presenting, whether it be poster board, markers, construction paper, so on and so forth. These are the kinds of research questions that we will be asking the students. Questions involving inquiries regarding firsthand data, the questions that they have that they describe using firsthand data, the kinds of external experiences that influence the ways that students collect and interpret firsthand data, how students are describing their thought processes as they create data, what their student beliefs are as they change from data design to manipulation to presentation, how their beliefs about their learning change as they go about this data analysis process, and how do the interactions between students influence the ways they interact with data. So all those research questions will be embedded through what's called a data storybook. That is to say, students will be documenting their journey from data creation to analysis and presentation, and questions within the storybook help the learners reflect on their processes of learning and keep track of data analysis. This is still a work in progress, but there will be questions like, what did you find interesting about the program today? What insights do you have about your data today? What's this data remind you of? And overall, what questions do you still have? This allows the students to really see how they've been constructing their understanding with the data. There will also be a pre and post survey, observation notes, and interviews of select students to further elucidate these research questions. These ones here. Study 2. What are the affordances and constraints of introducing qualitative research within a constructionist data science learning program? Second study addresses the fact that data science education is becoming increasingly open to including qualitative experiences. This is particularly good for folks with minimal technical experience because prior research has shown that they identify more with words than numbers, and it's still teaching different ways of thinking about data. That is to say, maybe a student, doesn't have the resources at home to have a strong technical background. This way they can still be included in the process of data science learning. So students will be afforded the opportunity to learn these qualitative methods in addition to quantitative methods to introducing basic research questions. And this is minimal because this is either going to be a camp or an after school program. So students are going to have basic interviews and inductive coding, but students who select to do this qualitatively will be specifically interviewed to gain a better sense about their experiences. Some of the research questions we'll be asking through these interviews are, how does introducing qualitative data collection influence their beliefs about the data? What kinds of questions do they ask? And what tools are they using to answer their questions? Because we're going to be giving them a variety of possible worksheets and ways of organizing data. Let's see what they pick. Study 3, what analytics of process data from firsthand data creation, manipulation, and visualization provide evidence of meaningful learning? So we're taking this all home right now, is that we want to develop practical measures of meaningful learning based on student-identified processes. This has been done before in the context of qualitative and quantitative data, but from what I've researched, it has not been done with both. And what I'm saying is that maybe it's possible to develop processes that align processes of data analysis that are common in both qualitative and quantitative processes. So by taking student processes. So by identifying processes from the evidences, from the artifacts that students generate. So this can include things like the code that they use for data analysis, any worksheets that they use as data analysis if they're not comfortable with using code, any code books like the one that I presented earlier, and what they wind up presenting. Let's see if there are patterns of meaningful learning within these processes. So this is the study that's still being fleshed out the most, but what identifiable patterns of meaning making can we draw from qualitative data, and what can we draw from quantitative process data in a constructionist environment? And I think that puts me at time. So for the rest of this session, I leave this up for questions, comments, and feedback.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much. That was amazing. Once again, does anyone have any questions about what John discussed with us? I wanted to say, especially in the context of the journal club that we want to have to continue this discussion. A lot of the concepts that you discussed, yes, are very prevalent for data science, but as all of us in the network can tell you, and other faculty and even students can tell you, that these concepts are also prevalent in all of our areas. And so I'm very excited to continue this discussion in the journal club because first of all, I thought you provided all different types of literature that could continue a discussion for weeks on end. But for specifically, I'm interested in to see how in the various other areas, how these same concepts that you were talking about, these different learning paradigms can be applied to how other faculty and students are thinking about learning. So I'm very excited for that.
Yeah, John, you did an excellent job. It was great. I was taking a ton of notes, and so I'm over the counseling department, and so I've studied Piaget before, and so I was taking a lot of notes on the constructivist theory. But a lot of what you were saying resonates with me, especially how students learn, and this idea of, truth and how it stands. So I really thank you for shedding so much light on this, and how, we are teaching students in the way they need to be active in their learning. And I'm really excited to see the results of your story as someone who teaches from narrative approaches, and also as a therapist does therapy from a narrative approach. Your idea of doing storytelling, but having them write their own stories was just absolutely, that sounds fantastic. So I really am interested in the results of your study and your dissertation. I'm excited to read it, but I'm also excited to see how you incorporate that in the classroom, because I think that's a fantastic way to engage students in learning, and really see how they write about the impact of that in their learning. So I have a ton of notes. I'm excited to actually delve into this a bit more and to see what the final results are for you. So thank you so much for coming and sharing with us today. This was excellent.
Thank you all so much.
And John, please accept this as your early invitation. Whenever you finish, you are welcome back to this lecture series to present, because we are all very interested in the results of your studies, because they are essential to us, what we're trying to do in our classrooms, and assuring that our students are able to learn as efficiently as possible.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much for joining. It was a wonderful talk.
Thank you so much, John.
So before everyone goes, once again, I want to reiterate the journal club. The first one will be, as I said, next Wednesday, same time, 11:15. There is a link on the website for the journal club. We will be continuing this discussion about these theories that John has introduced to us, and learning in the context when he's talking. And as those of us at Cookman are aware, a number of the things he discussed are actually even a part of our QEP, our Quality Enhancement Plan, using experiential learning to teach the students and build on the foundation of what the knowledge they already have to teach them new concepts. So I'm very excited to have this discussion for us, because I think it's where we are, and it is instrumental towards where we're trying to go. Once again, thank you, John. Please I'm sure we will be having you back very soon, because as I said, you are talking about the things that we are literally trying to do. Amazing talk. You're doing amazing work. I can't wait to see the results, and we appreciate your participation in the network.
Thank you so much for allowing me to participate in this space.
Does anyone have any more questions for John before we go? All right, folks. Thank you all so much for participating. Please be on the lookout. We will have another lecture next month. The gentleman that was speaking is the director of the Open Learning Initiative at Carnegie Mellon. His name is Norm. So please be on the lookout for that information. We will obviously be sending it out to you, and we look forward to your participation in that lecture and our participation in the Journal Club series. Thank you all.